She threw a glass of water in his face in front of 200 people. Not wine. Not anger by accident. A deliberate slow pour, right over the head of the man standing quietly behind her, and then she laughed. The room went silent. He didn't flinch. Didn't blink. Just reached up, wiped his face with the back of his hand, and kept his eyes on the exit door. That moment should have been the end of his story. Instead, it became the beginning of hers. What happened next on that mountain road 3 weeks later changed everything she thought she knew about power pride and the kind of man who stands between you and death. If you're watching this from New York, Chicago, Texas, Florida, or anywhere across this great country, drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button and the bell, because this story has 5 parts, and you do not want to miss what's coming. The morning Daniel Carter walked into the lobby of Sterling Industries, he was 17 minutes early. Not because he was nervous, because he was never late. He stood near the security desk in a charcoal gray suit that had been dry cleaned twice too many times, holding a single manila folder against his chest, and watching the revolving door like a man who understood that danger never announced itself. His shoes were polished. His tie was straight. His face was unreadable. The receptionist looked at him the way people in expensive buildings look at men who don't belong in expensive buildings. "Name?" she asked without looking up. "Daniel Carter. I have an 8 o'clock with Thomas Sterling." She typed something, waited, typed again. "Mr. Sterling's assistant will be down shortly." Daniel nodded and stepped to the side. He didn't sit. He stood near the wall where he could see both entrances, both elevator banks and the stairwell door. Habit. 12 years in special operations, followed by 4 years running private security, had wired him that way. He couldn't turn it off, even if he wanted to. He didn't want to. A woman in a tailored navy blazer came down in the elevator and crossed the marble floor with the kind of efficiency that meant she was paid to be efficient. "Mr. Carter, I'm Sandra, Mr. Sterling's executive assistant. He's ready for you." Thomas Sterling's office was on the 42nd floor, and it looked exactly like what it was, the office of a man who had spent 60 years building something massive and was now terrified of watching it collapse. Thomas was 71 years old, silver-haired and still sharp in the way that certain old men stay sharp, like a knife that's been used so long it's worn smooth on the handle but never lost its edge. He stood when Daniel came in, which told Daniel something right away. Men who stand to greet the people they hire are either genuinely respectful or they want something badly enough to perform respect. Thomas Sterling was both. "Daniel Carter," Thomas said, extending his hand. "I've read your file, all of it." "Yes, sir." "Sit down." Daniel sat. Thomas remained standing, which was a power move, but Daniel had been in rooms with generals and foreign intelligence officers and men who had made decisions that cost other men their lives. He was not intimidated by a CEO in a Brioni suit. "My daughter," Thomas said, walking to the window and looking down at the city below, "is going to get herself killed." Daniel waited. "Not because she's reckless, because she's brilliant and surrounded by people who want what she's built, and she doesn't see it. She thinks every threat is just corporate theater. She thinks money buys invincibility." He paused. "She is 32 years old, runs a $6 billion company, and has received 11 credible threats in the past 4 months. My security team believes at least 2 originated from inside Sterling Industries itself." "Inside," Daniel repeated. "You've narrowed down which division? Executive level. Beyond that," Thomas spread his hands. "That's part of what I need you for. You're not just a bodyguard, Mr. Carter. I need someone who can read people, read a room, and keep his head when Victoria decides she doesn't want to be protected." "Does she know I'm coming?" Thomas turned from the window with something complicated in his expression. Half guilt, half grim resolution. "She knows I hired someone. She doesn't know it's you specifically, and she is not." He searched for the diplomatic word, then abandoned it. "She is not going to make this easy." "They never do," Daniel said. Thomas studied him for a moment. "The file says you were a rescue specialist with the 75th Ranger Regiment, 3 combat deployments, saved 31 lives in active field operations. Received the soldier's medal after pulling 4 men from a burning vehicle under direct fire. He paused. And then you left. Yes, sir. Why? Daniel looked at him steadily. My wife died. My daughter was 6 years old, and she needed a father more than the army needed a soldier. Thomas Sterling was quiet for 3 full seconds. Her name is Lily, he said. Yes, sir. She's been ill. She has a heart condition that requires ongoing monitoring and occasional intervention. She's doing well right now. Thomas nodded slowly. Then he reached into his desk drawer and slid a contract across the surface. The number on page 4 is your monthly retainer. Medical benefits begin on day 1, full coverage, no deductible. I know what this job requires, and I know what you need. I'm not asking you to choose between your daughter and this work. Daniel picked up the contract. He read every page. Thomas waited without impatience, which was another thing that told Daniel something about the man. Then Daniel looked up. Tell me about the threats. Victoria Sterling was already 40 minutes into destroying someone's morning when Daniel arrived at her floor. Her voice carried through the glass walls of the conference room. Not because she was screaming, but because she had the particular kind of controlled fury that cut through walls without needing volume. Daniel stopped near the elevator and watched. She was standing at the head of a conference table with 12 people seated around it, all of them in various states of terrified stillness, like animals who understood that stillness was the safest option when a predator was moving. She was not what he expected, not that he'd spent much time forming expectations. He'd read her profile, her public bio, a few news profiles. He knew the data: 32 years old, youngest female CEO of a Fortune 100 tech company, Wharton MBA, at 24, inherited the CEO position from her father at 28, and then tripled the company's valuation in 3 years through a combination of ruthless acquisitions and product innovation that her competitors still hadn't caught up to. Data was data. In person, Victoria Sterling was something else. She moved like someone who had never once in her adult life been in a room where she wasn't in charge of the temperature. Her dark hair was pulled back tight. Her suit was architectural, the kind of tailoring that looked like armor. Her eyes were green and quick and absolutely merciless. And what I'm telling you, Marcus, is that the numbers your team submitted are not numbers. They are a creative writing exercise. They are fiction. And unlike fiction, which serves a purpose, this serves nothing except to make me question whether your entire department is operating in the same alternate reality you apparently live in. Fix it, by noon, or spend your afternoon updating your LinkedIn profile. She turned from the table, saw Daniel standing near the elevator, and stopped. Her expression did not change exactly, but something behind her eyes did. A quick calculation, a scan and assessment that took less than 2 seconds and reached a verdict. He could read verdicts. And her verdict was not kind. You must be my babysitter, she said. Daniel Carter, he said. Your father asked me to. I know what my father asked you to do. She walked past him toward her office. Try to keep up. He kept up. Her office was the corner suite, all glass and city, a view that on any other day might have felt like a reward for something. She dropped into her chair, opened her laptop, and did not look at him. Here's how this works, she said, eyes on her screen. You stand near whichever door you find aesthetically appropriate. You do not speak to my staff. You do not interrupt my meetings. You do not express opinions about my schedule, my decisions, my dietary choices, or my social life. You are a security function. Functions operate quietly in the background. Daniel stood across from her desk with his hands clasped in front of him. Understood, he said. And here's how this also works. Starting tomorrow, you'll take the north entrance instead of the main lobby. Your current car route passes 3 locations that have been under surveillance. Your evening schedule. I didn't ask for a briefing. No, ma'am. You're getting one anyway. He said it evenly, without aggression, without apology. Just fact. Because the people making threats against you are not interested in your preferences. And my job isn't to make you comfortable. It's to keep you alive. Silence. Victoria looked up from her laptop for the first time. She looked at him, the way she'd looked at everything in that conference room, with the same calculating green eyes that were already building a case against him before he'd finished speaking. How old are you? 36. You have a kid. A daughter. And you're doing this job. The two aren't in conflict. She leaned back in her chair. You're wearing a suit that was expensive in 2019, she said. Your watch is a Seiko. Your truck in the parking garage. Yes, I had you looked up before you arrived, is a 2014 F-150 with 200,000 miles on it. You live in Queens. Accurate, he said. So. She tilted her head slightly. Tell me why I should trust a man who can't afford a new suit to protect a $6 billion company's CEO. Daniel looked at her for a moment, not with anger, not with embarrassment. With the calm level attention of a man who had been shot at in 3 countries and was utterly unbothered by a rich woman cataloging his wardrobe. Because the men who shot at me in Kandahar didn't care what watch I was wearing, he said. And neither does whoever is following you. Victoria's expression flickered. It lasted less than a second. Then the mask came back smooth and impenetrable. Don't be in my way, she said, and turned back to her screen. The first week was a Cold War. Victoria moved through her days at the velocity of a woman who had learned that speed was a kind of armor. If you moved fast enough, nothing could land on you. She was in the office by 6:30 and rarely left before 9 at night. She took calls in cars, made decisions in elevators, dismissed people in the time it took most people to say hello. Daniel shadowed her. He said very little, but he was always there at the edge of her vision at the door, before she reached it 3 steps behind her on the sidewalk, when she insisted on walking the 2 blocks to her lunch meetings, which she insisted on doing despite his objections, which she ignored completely. He noticed things. He noticed that the parking garage attendant on the B level changed his shift 3 times in 1 week without explanation. He noticed that a white Escalade had parked on the same block outside the building for 4 consecutive mornings. He noticed that one of the junior executives, a man named Kevin Farr from the strategy division, always seemed to be somewhere near Victoria's schedule that he had no obvious reason to be near. He logged all of it. He said nothing to Victoria yet, because Victoria had made clear that anything he said would be treated like noise, and he needed her to eventually listen. You couldn't reach a person who had decided you were furniture. You had to wait for the moment the furniture moved on its own. On Wednesday of the second week that moment arrived. Victoria was walking to a lunch meeting at a restaurant 4 blocks north when Daniel stepped in front of her without warning and stopped. "What are you—" "Stop walking," he said. His voice was different, not louder. Something in the register of it changed like a frequency shift. The same voice that had given orders in places where wrong orders got people killed. Victoria stopped. Across the street, a man in a gray hoodie who had been walking parallel to them for 2 blocks, turned away suddenly and moved in the opposite direction. Daniel watched him go. Then he said quietly, "We're taking a cab." "I walk to Marcello's every Wednesday. Not today." "You don't?" "The man who just turned away has been in the garage twice this week. He was on your B level this morning at 6:47. And he just covered his face when I stopped moving, which means he knew he'd been made." Daniel looked at her. "We can argue about this on the sidewalk, or we can get in a cab. But if we stand here another 30 seconds, and I'm right, we've given him time to reposition." Victoria looked at him. A cab pulled up at the corner. She got in. Daniel got in after her, gave the driver an address 2 blocks away from Marcello's, and spent the whole ride watching the rear window. The restaurant was fine. The lunch went fine. Nothing happened. But when they came out, Victoria walked slightly closer to him than she had before. She didn't say anything about it. He didn't either. The water incident happened on a Thursday night. Sterling Industries was hosting a client reception on the 38th floor. Not a gala, not quite, but close enough. Investment partners, tech executives, a few journalists from the right publications, the kind of people who collected access to people like Victoria Sterling as social currency. Daniel stood near the bar. He always stood near the bar at these things, because bars had the best sightline in most event configurations. You could see the whole room, the entrances, the windows, and people came to you rather than the reverse, which meant he could talk to anyone without moving away from his position. He was watching a man near the window when he heard her voice. "Everyone," Victoria said, cutting through the ambient noise with that precision she had. "I want you to meet someone." He looked over. She was standing in the middle of a cluster of people. Some faces he recognized, some he didn't, and she was looking directly at him with a smile that he immediately understood was not a smile. "This is my bodyguard," she said. "Daniel." He walked toward her because walking away wasn't an option. "Daniel is here because my father worries." She said father the way people say it when they mean someone who still doesn't believe I'm capable. "Personally, I think it's a little unnecessary, but—" She gestured at him lightly, theatrically. "Here he is, our protector." She looked him up and down. "He's very serious, very dedicated. He probably shops at the same stores he shopped at in 2015, but you know, reliability is a virtue." A few people laughed. Not all of them. Some looked uncomfortable. Daniel stood there. He looked at her with the same steady, unaffected expression he'd been carrying for 2 weeks, and he said nothing, and he did not look away. That was the part that irritated her. He could see it. The non-reaction was more aggravating to her than anything he could have said back, because she had no leverage over equanimity. She was a woman who had learned to win arguments by making people emotional. A man who simply refused to become emotional gave her nothing to work with. She picked up her champagne glass. She looked at him. And then slowly, deliberately, not drunk, not accidental, absolutely intentional, she tilted the glass. The champagne poured over his shoulder and the front of his jacket. The cluster of people went very quiet. Someone said, "Oh," and stopped. Victoria smiled. "Clumsy me," she said. Daniel looked down at the champagne on his jacket. Then he looked up. "Excuse me," he said to no one in particular. He walked to the bar, got a club soda and a napkin, and dabbed at his jacket with the economy of a man who had far more important things to be annoyed about than champagne. Then he went back to his position near the bar and kept watching the room. That was the moment, not dramatically, not obviously, but definitively, that something shifted for several people in that room. Because what they had just seen was not a man being humiliated. What they had seen was a man demonstrating without a single word that he could not be diminished. The guests didn't know what to do with that. Neither did Victoria, though she hid it perfectly. At 11:15, when the reception had wound down and the last guests were filing into the elevators, Daniel was standing in the hallway outside the event space when Victoria came through the door. She was still wearing the performance from earlier, the slight cruelty in her posture, the armor fully engaged. But something else was there too, underneath it, something tighter. She stopped when she saw him. "You're still here," she said. "Still on shift." She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, without quite looking at him, "The champagne thing was part of the job," he said. "I was going to say unnecessary. Also accurate." She studied him. "You're not going to say anything else about it?" "No." "Why not?" Daniel looked at her calmly. "Because you already know it was wrong. Me saying it doesn't teach you anything you don't already know. And I'm not interested in performing outrage for an audience that's gone home." Victoria was quiet for a moment. She looked like she wanted to say something sharp, something that would re-establish the distance between them. Then, for reasons she probably didn't fully understand, she didn't. "Go home to your daughter, Mr. Carter," she said instead. "She's with her grandmother tonight," he said. "I'm here until you're secure for the evening." Victoria turned and walked to the elevator. Just before the doors closed, she said, not looking at him, said it to the air in front of her. "For what it's worth, you handled that well." The doors closed. Daniel stood in the empty hallway. Then he went back to check the security footage from the evening, because Kevin Farr had been at that reception and had spent 20 minutes near the window talking to someone Daniel didn't recognize, and that was the kind of detail that kept people alive. The night he found out about Lily changed things not for him, but for her, though she wouldn't admit it for weeks. It was late, close to midnight. The office floor was empty, except for the cleaning crew 2 rooms over, and Daniel was at a small desk near Victoria's door, reviewing the week's security logs on his laptop, cross-referencing the access badges against the floor plans looking for patterns. He heard her before he saw her. Victoria came out of her office with her heels in her hand, and her blazer draped over her arm, and her hair finally out of its professional architecture, falling loose around her face in a way that made her look briefly like a different person. She stopped when she saw him. "You're still here," she said. Again. The same words as the night of the reception. "Still working," he said. She came closer, looked at his screen. "What is that?" "Access log for the past 3 weeks. I'm running a pattern analysis looking for badge swipes that don't match job functions or scheduled access times." "You know how to do that?" "I have a degree in computer systems and 8 years of intelligence analysis." "Yes." Victoria blinked. Then she leaned against the desk across from him, arms folded, looking at him with something that wasn't quite what it had been before. "You've been here since 7 this morning," she said. 6:30. "And you're still working." "Someone has to." She was quiet. Then, "Don't you have a kid at home?" "She's 8. She goes to bed at 8:30. Her grandmother stays when I have late nights." "And she's—" Victoria stopped. Then, because something in the tiredness of the hour made the usual walls slightly lower. "Your father mentioned she has a health condition." My father. Slip of the tongue." Her expression tightened slightly. Daniel looked at her steadily. "She has a congenital heart condition," he said. "It's managed. She's healthy right now. She's the best kid I know." Victoria looked at the floor. Something moved across her face, something complicated enough that she probably didn't want him to see it. "Why do you do this job?" she asked. Not the version of the question from before, not the challenge in it, the "you can't afford a new suit" version. Something more direct, more real. "The medical coverage," he said simply. "And because I'm good at it." "You could do other things, with your background." "I could. But you're here. Spending your nights in this office being—" She stopped again. "Being what?" A long pause. "I wasn't kind to you," she said. "That night, at the reception." "No," he agreed. "And you stayed anyway." "That's the job." She looked at him, then really looked at him, the way she hadn't allowed herself to do before, without the assessment running, without the calculation. Just looking. "What's her name?" "Lily." Victoria repeated it quietly, like she was filing it somewhere. "Lily." She pushed off the desk and picked up her heels. "Go home eventually, Mr. Carter," she said. "I'll be done in an hour." She nodded. Then she walked to the elevator. Then she stopped and turned back. "The access log," she said. "What are you finding?" Daniel looked at his screen. "I'm finding," he said carefully, "that someone who should not have access to your personal calendar does." Victoria's face changed. "Who?" "I need 2 more days before I'm certain." She held his gaze. "2 days," she said. "Then you tell me everything." "Yes, ma'am." She turned and stepped into the elevator, and Daniel Carter went back to his access logs because somewhere inside Sterling Industries, someone was building a case against the woman he had been hired to protect, and he was going to find them before they found her first. He didn't know yet that he was already running out of time. 2 days later, Daniel kept his promise. He came into Victoria's office at 7:40 in the morning, before her first meeting, before Sandra had finished her second cup of coffee, before the floor had fully woken up. He set his laptop on the edge of her desk, turned it to face her, and let her read what was on the screen without saying a word. Victoria read it. Then she read it again. Her face didn't change. That was the thing about her that he had started to understand. Her face almost never changed on the surface. But her breathing changed, and her hands, which had been flat on the desk, slowly curled inward until her knuckles were pressing into the glass. "Kevin Farr," she said. "Kevin Farr," Daniel confirmed. "He's accessed your personal scheduling system 11 times in the last 3 weeks. His clearance level doesn't permit that access. He's been in the server room twice during hours when the log shows no maintenance request was submitted. And the phone he's been using for internal calls is registered to a shell account that routes through a VoIP service in Delaware." Victoria looked up from the screen. "Delaware. It's a common corporate privacy layer. Legal to use. Also very useful for people who don't want communication records tied to their real identity. She pushed back from the desk and stood. She walked to the window, which was what she did when she was thinking hard and didn't want anyone to watch her think. Daniel had noticed that about her in the first week she processed standing up, moving, looking at something far away. Like she needed physical distance from a problem to see it clearly. "Kevin's been with this company for 4 years, she said. "I promoted him myself." "I know. He's 29. I gave him the strategy position because he was the smartest analyst on the floor." "I know. And he's been leaking my schedule." It wasn't a question. It was Victoria Sterling turning a fact over in her hands like a stone she'd picked up and needed to understand the weight of. "I believe so," Daniel said. "I don't have confirmation of what he's been sharing or who he's sharing it with. But someone has been receiving accurate, real-time information about your location, your meetings, and your travel. And based on what I've found, FAR is the most likely source." She turned from the window. "You said most likely. What's your confidence level?" 85%. "That's not 100. No, it's not. Which is why I'm telling you and not acting on it unilaterally." Victoria looked at him. He could see her assembling something, running calculations behind those green eyes, weighing cost against risk, the way she did with everything. The way she'd been trained to do with everything since she was old enough to sit at a boardroom table. "What do you want to do?" she asked. "I want to feed him false information, a meeting that doesn't exist, a location that isn't real, and then watch who shows up." A long silence. "If you're right," she said slowly, "whoever he's reporting to will send someone to a place you've invented." "Yes. And if you're wrong, I've set a trap for an innocent employee. Which is why we designed the false meeting carefully. Nothing that could create legal liability. Just a location, just a time. We watch and we see." Victoria turned back to the window. The city spread out below her like a circuit board, all lines and nodes and invisible connections. That was the thing about cities that she'd always understood better than most people. Everything was connected to everything else. Pull one thread and something across the room moved. "Do it," she said. Daniel nodded and picked up his laptop. "One more thing," she said without turning around. "Ma'am, you have clearance to move through my schedule from this point. If something looks wrong to you, you tell me immediately. You don't wait for permission. You don't soften it." "Understood." "And Daniel." He stopped near the door. "If this is far," she paused. "I want to be there when we confirm it. I want to see his face." Daniel looked at her back. "You'll be the first to know," he said. He walked out. The trap was set by noon. A false calendar, entry in the system. A private lunch meeting at a restaurant in Midtown that Victoria Sterling would supposedly attend at 1 o'clock on Friday. No actual reservation made. No communication sent to anyone externally. Just a ghost entry in a compromised calendar that only one set of unauthorized eyes had been reading. Then they waited. Those 3 days were different. Daniel couldn't have described precisely what changed, only that it did. Victoria was still. Victoria still exacting, still relentless, still capable of making a grown man feel like a graduate student who'd shown up to the wrong exam. But there were moments now, small ones, brief ones, the kind that closed as fast as they opened when she didn't seem to be performing. She asked him things, not about security, not about access logs or threat assessments. Real things in the margins of other conversations. The way people ask real questions when they're trying not to seem like they're asking them. On Tuesday, between her 11 o'clock and her 12:30, she said without looking up from her desk, "How does she handle it when you're not there?" "Lily. She's 8. She knows what you do. That has to..." Victoria didn't finish the sentence. "She's been doing it her whole life," Daniel said. "She knows I come home. She trusts that. Kids shouldn't have to trust that." Daniel looked at her. "No, they shouldn't. But they do, and what matters is whether you give them reason to." Victoria set her pen down. "Her mother," she said carefully. "How long ago?" 2 years after Lily was born. Aneurysm. No warning. He said it the way you say things you've said 100 times and have rebuilt yourself around enough that saying them doesn't break you anymore. She was 30 years old. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. "I'm sorry," she said. "Thank you. I mean it. I know you do." She picked her pen back up, but something in the room had changed, a small, invisible shift, like a window opening somewhere. Neither of them mentioned it. On Wednesday evening, Daniel was running through the security checklist for Victoria's Thursday site visit when he heard raised voices from inside her office. He was on his feet before the second sentence landed. He opened the door without knocking. Adrian Cross was standing on the other side of Victoria's desk, and he was leaning forward with both hands flat on the surface, and his voice had the tightly controlled fury of a man who considered himself owed something he was not receiving. "I'm telling you," Adrian said, "the board is going to move whether you support it or not. You can be part of this, or you can be a casualty of it. Those are your choices, Victoria." Victoria was standing. She hadn't stepped back. She was the same distance from him she'd been when Daniel came in, which meant she hadn't flinched when he leaned in, which meant this was a dynamic with history. "Get out of my office," she said, very quietly. More quietly than she said most things. "You need to think about what I heard what you said." She picked up her phone. "You have 10 seconds before I call security and have you removed, at which point everyone in this building will know what happened in this office, and you will spend the next 6 months explaining to institutional investors why you thought threatening the CEO was a sound corporate strategy. Get out." Adrian Cross straightened up. He was 45, well-dressed, the kind of man who had learned to hide aggression under tailoring. He looked at Daniel for the first time. Something passed over his face, calculation, reassessment. He looked at Daniel the way certain men look at obstacles they've already decided to remove later. "This isn't finished," he said to Victoria. "Yes," she said, "it is." Cross walked out. He passed within 2 feet of Daniel without looking at him again. Daniel watched him go to the elevator and stood in the doorway until the floor number ticked down to the lobby. Then he turned back. Victoria was sitting on the edge of her desk with her arms crossed and her eyes on the middle distance, and the particular stillness of someone who is holding a great deal together through the force of will alone. "That was Adrian Cross," Daniel said. "Yes, your business partner. My co-founder." She said it like a word that had gone bad in her mouth. "He owns 22% of this company. We built the first platform together in a 1-bedroom office in Brooklyn when I was 24. How long has he been like that with you?" Victoria looked at him. "Like what?" "Like someone who's already decided you're in his way." A pause. Then quietly, 6 months maybe. It started as strategic disagreements. Then it became, she gestured slightly with one hand, this. Daniel crossed the room and set his phone on the desk in front of her. "I need you to look at something," he said. She looked at the screen. It was the access log from the server room, 2 entries with Farr's badge. But next to them on the same night, 40 minutes earlier, a different badge. An executive-level clearance. Victoria looked at the access number, then looked up at Daniel, and he watched the recognition move through her face, like weather moving through a landscape. First, the recognition, then the meaning of the recognition, then what the meaning meant for everything she thought she'd understood. "That's Adrian's level clearance," she said. "Yes." He was in the server room. 40 minutes before Farr, same night. The silence in the room was the kind that has weight. "They're working together," she said. "That's what the evidence suggests. Adrian and Kevin Farr," she turned the words over. "My co-founder and my strategy director." She laughed, one short involuntary sound that had nothing funny in it at all. "Of course, Victoria." He used her first name without thinking, then recalibrated, but she didn't react to it. "I need you to behave exactly as normal tomorrow and Friday. Don't change your interactions with either of them. Don't avoid them. Don't look at them differently." "You think I can't?" "I think you're excellent at this. I'm not questioning your ability. I'm reminding you what's at stake if we move too soon." He paused. "If we spook them before Friday, whoever they're reporting to disappears, and we lose the proof we need." She held his gaze for a long moment. "You're very good at this," she said. Thank you. That wasn't a compliment, it was an observation. I know, he said. It doesn't change the answer. She almost smiled. Not quite. Normal, she said. Until Friday. Fine. Thank you. She looked at the screen again. Daniel. Ma'am. If this goes where I think it's going. She stopped. How bad does it get? He thought about telling her something reassuring. He decided against it. It could get very bad, he said. But we're going to stay ahead of it. Victoria nodded once slowly, the way people nod when they're not sure they believe something, but they need to believe it anyway. Go home to Lily, she said. Not yet. I want to run. Daniel. The firmness in her voice carried something different this time. Not authority, something more human. She needs her father more than I need a security log. The cameras are on. The floor is locked. Go home. He looked at her. For the first time since he'd walked into this building, he couldn't read her expression completely. He picked up his jacket. I'll be back at 6, he said. I know, she said. You always are. He left, and Victoria Sterling sat in her office alone, with the city spread out dark and glittering below her, and thought about a man who had let someone pour champagne on him without flinching, and who logged her access patterns until midnight, and who went home every night to a little girl named Lily. She thought about that for a long time. Then she called her assistant and had Adrian Cross's access badge quietly flagged for monitoring. She didn't tell Daniel she'd done it. She told herself it was because she didn't need his approval. The real reason was something she wasn't ready to name. Friday arrived the way Fridays arrive when you've been waiting for them fast from a distance, and then suddenly, entirely there. The fake lunch entry said 1 o'clock at an Italian restaurant on 52nd Street. Victoria was in a real meeting across town at that same time with Daniel beside her, and 2 members of his secondary security team posted near the restaurant on 52nd Street with instructions to observe and document. At 12:47, his phone buzzed. He looked at it under the edge of the conference table. A text from Marcus Webb, the senior man he'd posted 2 individuals. Parked across from the restaurant at 12:44. White Escalade, same vehicle from Monday morning. Daniel kept his face still. He texted back plates. The plates came back 30 seconds later. Registered to a leasing company in New Jersey that when you traced it forward, 2 corporate layers connected to a security consulting firm that had done work previously for 2 companies, both of which had been involved in hostile acquisition attempts against Sterling Industries' competitors. Not random, not opportunistic. Organized. Professional. Patient. This wasn't just corporate espionage anymore. Daniel looked up from his phone and caught Victoria's eye across the conference table. He gave her the smallest, most controlled signal, a slight tilt of the head, nothing more. She processed it in less than a second. Gentlemen, she said to the room without any change in her voice. I need 15 minutes. Please help yourselves to coffee. She stood, and Daniel followed her into the hallway. She took his phone before he offered it and read the messages from Marcus. When she looked up, her jaw was set. They sent people, she said. Yes. They actually sent people to a location they thought I would be at. Yes. This isn't far leaking schedules for a board vote. Her voice was controlled, but barely. Someone wanted to know where I'd be at 1 o'clock on a Friday. That's correct. Victoria handed the phone back. Her hands were steady, which said something about who she was. A lot of people in that moment would have been shaking. What do we do? She asked. We keep the evidence chain clean. Marcus is documenting everything. When they leave, we track the vehicle. We build the file. And FAR. When we have enough to move legally and effectively, we move, not before. How long? Daniel looked at her steadily. I need a week, maybe 10 days. 10 days. She repeated it like a distance she had to walk. I know that feels like a long time. It feels like 10 days of someone knowing where I am, which is why, he said. From this point forward, I control your location information entirely. Nothing goes into the system. Nothing goes to staff more than 30 minutes in advance. FAR gets dummy information from this point. Cross gets nothing. Victoria was quiet. She was running the calculation. He could always tell when she was doing it. There was a particular quality to her silence when something was being processed rather than felt. "You're not just a bodyguard," she said. "No, you've been running an investigation this whole time. That's what the job required. My father knew that when he hired you. Your father is a smart man." Something shifted in her expression, not softening exactly. Something more like the moment when a tight knot releases just by a fraction. "What do you need from me?" she asked. "Your trust," he said. "And 10 days." She looked at him for a long moment. The hallway was empty. The conference room door was closed, and for a second, it was just the two of them in the particular quiet of a situation that had become something neither of them had entirely anticipated. "You have it," she said. They went back into the meeting. No one in that conference room knew that the woman presenting slides on regional market expansion had just made a decision that would unravel 2 years of conspiracy inside her own company. She was flawless, focused, the version of Victoria Sterling that had built an empire from nothing. Daniel watched the door. That night, when the office was quiet again, Victoria came to the small desk where he was working, a habit that had formed without either of them deciding it, and she sat across from him with a cup of coffee she'd gotten herself, which was something she never did. There was always someone who got the coffee. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes." "The morning you came in, first day." She wrapped both hands around her cup. "I said you looked like you needed protection yourself." Daniel said nothing. "You heard that. Obviously. And you stayed. That's the job. Stop saying that." There was something sharp in her voice, but aimed inward, not at him. "You stayed because—" She stopped, started again. "Most people would have walked out, or said something back, or held it against me quietly. I've been in situations where the people I was protecting were terrified and acted like they weren't," Daniel said. "Fear makes people mean, especially proud people." Victoria looked at her coffee. "I wasn't afraid," she said. "Yes," Daniel said. "You were." A beat of silence. "You're very annoying," she said. "My daughter says the same thing." And Victoria laughed. Not the performance she used at galas and receptions, not the edge weapon laugh she deployed in conference rooms. A real one, short and surprised and completely unguarded. It lasted about 3 seconds. Then she caught herself, and the composure came back, and she looked down at her coffee, like the laugh had been a small accidental disclosure she was deciding whether to acknowledge. She decided not to, but it stayed in the room with them, that laugh. It had weight. "Tell me something about her," Victoria said. "Lily, tell me one thing." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "She talks to her plants," he said. "She has 6 of them on the windowsill in her room. She gave them all names. She tells them about her day." He paused. "She told me once that plants need to know someone is paying attention, or they won't grow." Victoria looked at him. "That's—" "Yeah," he said. Another silence. But a different kind, now the kind that isn't empty. "She sounds like a remarkable kid," Victoria said. "She is. No hesitation, no qualification. She is the best thing I've ever done." Victoria nodded slowly. She looked at the city through the window for a while. "I've never—" she started, then stopped. "Never what?" "Nothing." She stood up. "Early morning tomorrow. I need you here by 6. I'll be here at 5:45. She started toward her office, then stopped with her hand on the doorframe. "Daniel." "Ma'am?" "My father hired you because he trusts you completely. He showed me your file this week, the full file." She didn't turn around. "The incident in Kandahar. The 4 men you pulled from the vehicle." He said nothing. "You went back in twice," she said. "The vehicle was on fire, and you went back in twice." Still nothing. "Why?" she asked. "Why did you go back?" A pause that stretched long enough that she did turn around. I was looking at her with that steady, uncomplicated directness that she'd never quite been able to put in a category. "Because there were still people inside," he said. Victoria held his gaze for 3 full seconds. Then she turned and went into her office and closed the door, and Daniel Carter sat at his small desk in the hallway and listened to the city breathe 40 floors below him. And in that moment, though, neither of them would have said it aloud. Something that had started as contempt and resistance had become something neither of them had a clean word for yet. Something that lived in shared late nights and coffee cups, and the name Lily said quietly in a quiet room. Something that had not finished becoming what it was going to be. The trap was set. The evidence was building. The players were in motion. And the man who had once been dismissed as furniture was the only one who could see the whole board. He went back to work. The 10 days Daniel asked for became 8. On the morning of the 8th day, he walked into Victoria's office at 6:15 with a folder that was thicker than anything he'd brought her before, set it on her desk without a word, and stood back while she read it. She read for 11 minutes without speaking. Daniel stood and watched her face, and counted the moments where her breathing changed. There were 4 of them. The first when she saw the financial documents. The second when she reached the communication logs. The third when she found the board member names. The fourth when she got to the last page, which contained a single photograph taken outside a private club in Midtown 3 weeks ago, showing Adrian Cross and Kevin Farr sitting across a table from a man named Raymond Voss. Raymond Voss was the CEO of Meridian Capital Group, a private equity firm that had been quietly accumulating Sterling Industries stock for 14 months. Victoria set the folder down. She pressed both palms flat on the desk surface and looked at the wall behind Daniel's head for a long moment. "He's been building a case for a hostile takeover," she said. "Yes, using Farr to access my schedule, my strategic plans, my acquisition targets." Her voice was controlled in the way that pressure produces control, not calm, but compressed. "He fed Meridian information that let them position their trades ahead of our announcements." "That's insider trading," Daniel said. "Federal level. I know what it is." She stood up. "Adrian Cross." She said the name like she was reading it off a tombstone. "I gave that man 15% of everything I built. I went to his mother's funeral. I stood up in front of the entire company and called him the most trustworthy partner I had ever worked with." She laughed again, that short, sharp, painful sound that wasn't a laugh. "I said that in the all-hands meeting 6 months ago. 6 months ago, and he was already doing this." "Victoria." She looked at him. "There's more." He reached into the folder and pulled out a single page she hadn't reached yet. "The threats. The original 11 that brought your father to me. 3 of them were staged, created by Farr's team and fed to your security department to make the situation feel more unstable than it was." She stared at him. "Staged threats. To justify board concern about your ability to maintain a stable operating environment. There's documentation here of a strategy session between Farr and a communications consultant. The goal was to create a pattern that looked like external pressure but was internally generated." He paused. "They were trying to make you look like a CEO in crisis, to give the board a reason to vote for a leadership transition." The room was very quiet. Victoria picked up the single page and read it. Then she set it down. "They were going to use me to remove me," she said. "Yes. My own company. Yes." She walked to the window. The city was fully lit now, the morning sharp and clear, in a way that felt obscene given the conversation happening inside it. "What do we do?" she asked. The same question she'd asked in the hallway outside the conference room 8 days ago. But she said it differently now, not as a woman looking for tactical guidance, but as someone who had been hit hard enough that the first reflex was to check whether the people around her were still standing. "You have enough for the SEC and DOJ both," Daniel said. "The financial patterns alone constitute a securities violation case. The internal communications are damning, and I have Marcus's surveillance documentation of the Meridian meetings. How long before we move legally?" "Your attorneys need 24 to 48 hours to review the package and file the initial disclosure. After that, it's out of our hands and into the regulators. And between now and then, no one knows what we have." She turned from the window. "Adrian has a board call scheduled for Thursday," she said. "The agenda is listed as quarterly performance review, but based on what's in that folder, he's planning to introduce the leadership transition proposal," Daniel said. "Thursday is the move." Victoria looked at him. And we're filing Wednesday. That's the plan. She nodded. Then something moved across her face, something older and more complicated than the strategic calculation. How was my friend? She said. She stopped. He taught me how to read a term sheet. Did you know that when I was 24 and we were just starting, I didn't know the difference between a convertible note and a safe agreement, and Adrian sat across from me in that one-bedroom office and walked me through every line. A pause. He knew things about me that nobody else knew. My fears about the company. My fears about... She stopped again, looked down. He knew everything, and he used it. Daniel didn't say anything. Because there was nothing useful to say, and he understood that sometimes silence was the most honest response to betrayal that deep. After a moment, she looked up. I want to be the one who tells him, she said. When it's done, I want to sit across from him and watch him understand that I know. That's your right, Daniel said. Is it stupid tactically? Probably, he said. But some things aren't about tactics. She looked at him for a long moment. Get my attorney on the phone, she said. And Daniel, she picked up the folder. No one else sees this until I say so. Not my assistant, not the security team, nobody. Understood. He left to make the call, and Victoria Sterling stood at her window with the folder in her hands and thought about a 24-year-old woman in a one-bedroom office who had trusted the wrong person, and how long it had taken to learn that some debts never get paid the way you expect. Tuesday passed in controlled urgency. Her attorneys worked through the night reviewing the package Daniel had assembled. Wednesday morning at 8:17, the disclosure was filed. By noon on Wednesday, two things happened simultaneously. The first was that Raymond Voss of Meridian Capital stopped answering his phone. The second was that Kevin Farr did not show up to work. Daniel found out about Farr at 12:40 when Sandra mentioned it casually while bringing in a lunch tray. Something about Kevin calling in sick, which he hadn't done once in 4 years at Sterling Industries. Daniel was on his feet before Sandra finished the sentence. He crossed to his laptop and pulled up the access log. Farr's badge hadn't been used since 7:40 the previous evening. His company email had been accessed from an external IP at 11:15 last night after business hours from somewhere that wasn't his apartment's registered address. Daniel's phone buzzed. Marcus. He picked up on the first ring. Talk to me. The Escalade, Marcus said. It came back this morning, parked 2 blocks from the building at 6:50 a.m., stayed 45 minutes and left. Direction. West, toward the tunnel. Daniel was already moving to Victoria's office. He pushed the door open without knocking. Victoria was on a call. She looked up, saw his face, and said into the phone, I'll have to call you back, and hung up. Farr's gone, Daniel said. He accessed company files remotely last night. I think someone warned him the disclosure was coming. Victoria stood up. That's impossible. Nobody knew except your attorney's office, Daniel said. How many people at the firm were working on this? A beat. 4 people, she said. My lead counsel and 3 associates. Do any of them have a relationship with Adrian Cross? The expression that crossed her face was the specific look of someone who has just understood something terrible. Jennifer Cole, she said. She's a senior associate at the firm. She and Adrian. She pressed one hand to her forehead. They were in the same social circle. I didn't even consider. Call your attorney, right now. Tell him Jennifer Cole is not to have access to any further documents and that you need to know exactly who she contacted in the last 24 hours. Victoria was already dialing. Daniel walked out into the hallway and called Marcus. I need eyes on Adrian Cross, he said. Wherever he is right now, I need to know. He's in the building, Marcus said. Came in at 8 this morning, hasn't left. Stay on him. He hung up and stood in the corridor and thought about the architecture of what was happening. Farr was gone. Someone at the law firm had talked, which meant Cross knew the disclosure was coming, which meant the timing had shifted from their control to his. And a man who knew he was about to be exposed had 2 options: run or accelerate. Adrian Cross was not the kind of man who ran. Daniel went back to Victoria's office. She was still on the phone with her attorney. Her voice was ice cold and precise. which he'd come to understand was what she sounded like when she was genuinely frightened and refusing to show it. She hung up. "Jennifer Cole made 3 calls yesterday evening," she said. "My attorney is pulling the records now. One of the numbers is registered to a consulting firm that doesn't appear to have a physical address. Ghost company, like the shell account Farr used." "Same network," Daniel said. "This is more organized than we thought. Cross has been building this infrastructure for a long time." Victoria looked at him. "How long?" "Based on the financial patterns in the disclosure package." He paused. "Possibly 18 months. He's been planning this for 18 months. Yes, she sat down. Not the controlled sit of a CEO managing a meeting, the sight of a person whose legs have made a decision the rest of them hasn't caught up to yet. "I've been running board calls with him," she said. We had dinner 3 weeks ago. He told me I looked tired and that I needed to take a vacation. He looked me in the face and said that." She shook her head slowly. 18 months. "Victoria, I need you to focus." He said it firmly enough that she looked up. "Cross knows the disclosure is filed. He doesn't know what's in it specifically, and he doesn't know the full scope of Marcus's surveillance documentation. He thinks he has time." "Does he?" "The SEC will contact him within 48 to 72 hours. But between now and then..." His phone went off. Not a call, an alert. He'd set automated flags on 3 access points within the building. One of them had just triggered. He looked at the screen. Server room, B level. Access at 12:58 p.m. Adrian Cross's badge. Daniel looked up at Victoria. "He's in the server room right now," he said. Victoria was on her feet before he finished the sentence. "He's trying to delete something," she said. "Or plant something, or both." Daniel was already moving. "Stay here." "Absolutely not." "Victoria, that is my server room. That is my company's data, and that man is down there right now doing something to it." She walked past him. "You can follow me or meet me there." He followed her. The elevator ride to the B level was 40 seconds. Daniel spent all 40 of them positioned between Victoria and the door, which she tolerated without comment. When the doors opened, he moved first. The server room was at the end of a corridor. The access light was green. Daniel held up one hand, stopping Victoria 6 feet from the door. He listened. He could hear movement inside. 2 voices, low, fast, urgent. 2 people, not one. He turned to Victoria and mouthed, "Call security. Now." She pulled out her phone. Daniel pushed open the server room door. Adrian Cross was standing at one of the terminal stations with a USB drive in his hand, and another man beside him. A man Daniel didn't recognize, 30s, the build of someone who had learned to make himself useful through physical presence rather than intellect. Cross looked up. For 1 second his face showed everything, the surprise, the calculation, the rapid reassessment of a man who had been planning for the wrong scenario. Then it went smooth. "Daniel," he said pleasantly, as if they had run into each other in the lobby. "I was just backing up some files. You know how paranoid I am about data." "Step away from the terminal," Daniel said. "I don't take instructions from the help," Cross said. The pleasantness evaporated. Just like that, like a mask lifted in one clean motion. The man beside Cross moved. How was fast. Daniel had clocked him as a potential threat the moment he saw the build, and he was already moving before the other man fully committed to the direction. Daniel caught the arm, redirected the momentum, and put him against the server rack with enough controlled force to end the engagement, without starting one that broke equipment worth several $100,000. The man dropped. Not unconscious, just persuaded. Cross stepped back. "Don't," Daniel said. Cross looked at the man on the floor, then at Daniel, then at the door behind Daniel, where Victoria was standing, having ignored his instruction to stay in the corridor. Something moved across Cross's face when he saw her. Not guilt. That was the thing that would stay with Victoria longest, she said later. There was no guilt in his face. Just the cold arithmetic of a man revising his exit strategy. "Victoria," he said. "Adrian." Her voice was absolutely steady. "Get away from my server. This isn't what it looks like. Do you know what's interesting about that phrase? She said. Every person who's ever said it to me has been lying. She walked past Daniel into the room which Daniel did not love, but could not stop without creating a different problem. I filed the disclosure this morning. The SEC has the financial records, the communication logs, and 3 weeks of surveillance footage of your meetings with Raymond Voss. She stopped 5 feet from him. I know about FAR. I know about the shell companies. I know about Jennifer Cole. She paused. I know about all of it, Adrian. Cross was very still. You've been building this for 18 months, she said. Inside my company, with my data, using my trust in you as the key to every door you walked through. Her voice hadn't risen. It was quieter than when she'd started. You taught me how to read a term sheet. You told me I could trust my instincts. You said those words to me, and then you spent a year and a half proving that I shouldn't have trusted yours. Yours. Cross looked at her, and then he said something that Daniel would remember for a long time afterward. You would have made the same calculation, Cross said. If the positions were reversed, don't pretend otherwise. Victoria held his gaze. No, she said. I wouldn't. You don't know that. I do, she said. Because you had something worth protecting, and you chose to protect your stake instead. I had something worth protecting, and I chose to protect it. She gestured a small, deliberate motion. The difference between us is that I know the difference between what I built and what I own. Security arrived 47 seconds later. Cross was escorted out. The unidentified man was held for NYPD, who arrived 14 minutes after that. The USB drive was preserved as evidence. Daniel stood in the server room after everyone else had gone and looked at the terminal. Cross had been accessing. Whatever he'd been trying to do, the timestamp showed he'd been in the system for 3 minutes and 14 seconds. Not long enough to accomplish much. Maybe nothing. Maybe something. He photographed everything, documented the access log, and forwarded it to the disclosure package attorney within the hour. When he came back up to the main floor, Victoria was in her office. She was sitting at her desk, and she was looking at a photograph on her phone, an old one from the thumbnails. He caught a glimpse of before she put it face down. He thought it might have been a photo of 2 people in a small office. The 1-bedroom in Brooklyn she'd mentioned. She looked up. Is it over? She asked. The immediate threat is contained, he said. The legal process takes time. Cross will have attorneys. Meridian will negotiate. This doesn't resolve in a day. But he's gone. He's gone from the building, yes. She nodded, looked at the phone face down on her desk. He said I would have done the same thing. Daniel sat down across from her, which he hadn't done in her office before he usually stood. He sat down now and looked at her directly. You didn't, he said. I know. That's the only answer that matters. She looked at him. Her eyes were dry. Victoria Sterling did not cry in front of people. Daniel had understood that early, but there was something in them that was the emotional equivalent of the effort it costs to not cry. I don't know how to do this, she said, quietly enough that he almost didn't hear it. Do what? Be wrong about someone that fundamental. She shook her head slightly. I'm not wrong about people. It's one of the things I'm actually good at. Reading people. Knowing what they want, knowing what they'll do, and I was completely entirely wrong about him. Daniel was quiet for a moment. You weren't wrong about what he was when you met him, he said. People change, especially when there's enough money involved. That's generous. It's true. She looked at the face-down phone. I keep thinking about all the times I trusted him with things that mattered. Decisions. Fears. She paused. He knew about my father's health concerns last year, the cardiac episode in March. I told Adrian because I needed someone to talk to, and I trusted him. Daniel went still. Your father had a cardiac episode in March, he said carefully. Was that made public anywhere? No, we kept it completely private. Why? He stood up. Because one of the staged threats, the ones FAR generated, was filed in April, 2 weeks after March. He was already moving to his laptop. If Cross knew your father was potentially compromised and used that timing to manufacture a crisis in the company. He pulled up the threat documentation and matched the dates. April 7th, 11 days after Thomas Sterling's cardiac episode. He turned the screen to face her. Victoria looked at it. The color left her face. "I used my father's health," she said. Not a question. "It looks that way. If your father was incapacitated, the board would have needed to act quickly on leadership continuity. The manufactured threats created the environment. Cross had the proposal ready." She stood up very slowly. Her voice when she spoke was something Daniel had not heard from her before. Not anger, not authority. Something colder and more absolute. "Get my attorneys on the phone," she said. "Add this to the disclosure, every piece of it." She picked up her own phone. "And I need to call my father." She dialed. Thomas Sterling picked up on the second ring. "Dad," she said. And in that single word with him on the phone, something in her voice came loose in the smallest possible way. The one degree of looseness that she allowed the fraction of the real thing that came through when the person on the other end of the line was someone she loved without complication. "Victoria, what's happened?" "I need you to listen to me," she said. "And I need you to know that it's handled. It's already handled. But I need to tell you something." Daniel walked out into the corridor to give her privacy. He stood in the hallway outside her office and listened to the city and thought about what it cost a person to be powerful and still be blindsided. To have built something extraordinary and still find that the people closest to you could use your love as a blueprint for your destruction. He thought about that for a while. Then his phone buzzed. It was his mother. A text. A photo, actually. Lily, sitting on the back porch with dirt on her hands and a small plant in front of her, and an enormous gap-toothed smile on her face. The text below the photo said, "She planted a new one today. Named it Daniel. Said it needed to grow big and strong." He looked at that photo for 10 seconds. Then he put his phone away because Victoria was opening her office door, and she had the look of someone who had finished a hard conversation and was ready to continue the harder work. "He's okay," she said. "My father. He wanted to know if you were still on the job." "What did you tell him?" "I told him you were standing outside my door." She paused. He said, "Good. Keep listening to him." Daniel looked at her. "Your father's a smart man," he said again. "So you keep saying." She crossed her arms. "Daniel." "Ma'am, I owe you an apology that I haven't fully given you yet." She said it without the performance, without the distance she usually maintained. Direct, plain, the way she talked when she wasn't managing anything. "What I did at the reception, what I said to you on the first day, the way I—" She stopped, started again. "I treated you like you were less than what you are because of how you looked and what you drove and where you lived. And I want to say directly that I was wrong. Not strategically wrong, not professionally wrong, wrong." Daniel looked at her steadily. "I know," he said. "I'm not asking for forgiveness right now. I'm just saying it." "Okay. You could say thank you." "I'm deciding whether I believe you mean it or whether you're managing me." A pause. Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly. "Both, probably," she said. "I'm still me, but the part that means it is real." "I know that too," Daniel said. She held his gaze. "I'm going to be better at this," she said. "Not just with you, with people." He didn't respond to that immediately. He let it sit. "Your father asked me when I started whether I thought I could protect someone who didn't want to be protected," he said finally. "I told him that the job was to keep you alive, not to make you like me." "And now?" she asked. "And now I think the job was always more complicated than that." He paused. "And I think you know it too." She looked at him for a long moment. Then Sandra knocked on the open doorframe and said, "The attorneys are online too." And the moment closed, the way all moments do not gone, just compressed into the structure of everything that came after. Victoria went back to her desk. Daniel went back to his position by the door. The city moved around them, indifferent and enormous, full of a million private moments like this one that nobody recorded and everyone carried. And somewhere in the building, in the evidence chain, in the legal filings and surveillance documentation and server room access logs and financial records, The truth about Adrian Cross was assembling itself into the form that would eventually find the light. But that wasn't what Daniel was thinking about. He was thinking about a little girl named Lily who had planted something and named it after her father. And he was thinking about the fact that you could tend something carefully, give it attention and consistency and presence, and watch it grow into something real, not because you forced it, but because you showed up every day. You showed up every day. That was the whole thing, really. That was all of it. 3 weeks after Adrian Cross was escorted out of Sterling Industries, the legal machinery was moving slowly, loudly, the way legal machinery always does when it finally catches something real in its gears. The SEC had issued formal investigative subpoenas. Meridian Capital's trading records were frozen. Kevin Farr had been located in Philadelphia, had retained an attorney, and was reportedly cooperating with federal investigators in exchange for considerations that his lawyer described as appropriate to the level of his involvement, which everyone understood meant he was giving up Adrian Cross with both hands. Cross himself had gone completely quiet. His attorneys were talking to the DOJ. His social media had gone dark. His name had disappeared from the Sterling Industries website so thoroughly that if you didn't know to look, you'd never know he'd been there. But Victoria knew. She knew every morning when she walked past the office that had been his still empty because she hadn't decided what to do with it yet, and the not deciding was its own kind of statement. She knew when she ran board calls and looked at the chair where he used to sit. She knew when people asked how she was holding up and she said fine, in the way that contained everything she was refusing to say. The company was stable. The board had rallied around her with the particular enthusiasm of people who were grateful to not be on the wrong side of a federal investigation. 3 new strategic partnerships had been announced. The stock had recovered and then climbed past where it had been before the disclosure. By every visible measure, Victoria Sterling had won, and Daniel Carter was still standing outside her office door every morning at 5:45, and she was still coming out of her office at 11:15 at night, and they were still having the late conversations that had somehow become the fixed point of both their days, without either of them formally agreeing to that. But something was different now. The crisis had passed. The threat level had been formally downgraded. And that meant, in the language of private security contracts, that the terms of Daniel's engagement were due for review. He had not brought it up. She had not brought it up. They both knew it was there. On a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks and 2 days after the server room, Thomas Sterling called Daniel directly. Not through Sandra. Not through Victoria's scheduler. His personal cell, which he used for things he considered important enough to handle himself. "How is she?" Thomas asked. "Stronger than she looks," Daniel said. "Which is saying something because she looks very strong." Thomas made a sound that was part laugh, part something more complicated. "She gets that from her mother. Marlena could walk through a wall and never show you the bruise." A pause. "How are you, Daniel?" "I'm well, sir." "Lily?" "She's good. She had a check-in with her cardiologist last week. Numbers are stable. He's very pleased with her." "Good. That's good." Thomas was quiet for a moment, then said, "The contract review is coming up. I imagine you've both been avoiding that conversation." Daniel said nothing. "I'm going to tell you something as a father and not as your employer," Thomas said. "Victoria has not been easy to love. She has not been easy to know. After her mother died, she built walls that I spent 10 years trying to find doors in. I mostly failed." He paused. "You found a door in 6 weeks." Daniel kept his voice even. "Sir, I'm not making an assumption. I'm making an observation. What you do with it is your business and hers." Another pause. "But I am asking you to stay. Whatever the terms need to be, I'll make them right." "I need to talk to her first," Daniel said. "Of course you do," Thomas said. "You always do the right thing in the right order. It's extremely irritating for the rest of us." But there was warmth in it. "Talk to her." Daniel hung up. I thought about that conversation for the rest of the morning, standing outside her office, listening to her run a product review call through the closed door, her voice precise and demanding, and full of the particular energy she brought to work that was like watching someone who had been built specifically for the thing they were doing. At noon the call ended. He opened the door. She looked up. She had her reading glasses on. She'd recently started wearing them, which she considered a personal affront from the universe, and which she only wore when she thought no one who mattered was looking. "Your father called me," Daniel said. She took the glasses off. "Of course he did," she said. "He's been trying to manage this situation since before you walked in the door." "What did he say?" "He asked me to stay." Victoria set the glasses on her desk. She looked at them, not at him. "The threat level has been downgraded," she said. "Yes." "The primary actors are under legal process." "Yes." "So technically the terms of your original contract are due for review," he said. "Yes." She was quiet. "What do you want?" she asked. And she said it the way she'd started saying things to him in the last few weeks, directly, without the performance layer, without the management reflex. "Just the question. I want to know what you want," he said. She looked up at him. "Don't do that," she said. "Do what?" "Make me say it first." He looked at her steadily. "I've been standing outside your door for 6 weeks, every morning at 5:45. I've been here for every crisis, every late night, every conversation you said you weren't having, and then had anyway. I think it's fair to ask what you actually want before I negotiate my own terms." "That is extremely annoying," she said. "Your father said the same thing." Something crossed her face. Exasperation, amusement, the particular mix those two things made when they lived in close proximity. "I want—" she started, then stopped, then started again. "I want things to not change, which is not a professional position, which I'm aware of. It's an honest one. It's impractical. Most honest things are." She picked up the glasses and put them back in their case. He'd noticed she did that when she was thinking through something she didn't want to think through. Handled small objects kept her hands busy. "If you stay in this role," she said carefully, "with the threat level where it is, it becomes something different than what it was." "Yes," he said. "And if it becomes something different, then we need to be clear about what it is." "Agreed. And I don't know what it is yet," she said, quietly. The kind of quiet that wasn't uncertainty, it was more like standing at the edge of something large and choosing your step carefully. "Neither do I," Daniel said. "But I know it's real, and real things are worth figuring out." Victoria looked at him for a long moment. "I need time," she said. "You have it." "I don't mean today, I mean—" "I know what you mean," he said. "You have it." She nodded once. "Tell my father yes," she said. He left before she could see the way that landed on him, because some things you carry quietly. The Friday night it happened, there was no warning. That was the thing about real danger. Daniel had always known. Not the manufactured kind, not the staged threats and corporate espionage. Real danger didn't file a flight plan. It arrived in the gap between one moment and the next, in the second, when everything that had been stable stopped being stable, and the only thing that mattered was whether the right person was standing in the right place. Victoria had a private dinner meeting with a potential acquisition target, a small AI infrastructure company whose founder she'd been courting for 3 months. The meeting was in New Jersey, a 40-minute drive at a private residence, because the founder was famously uncomfortable with public venues. The threat assessment for the evening was low. The legal process with Cross and Farr was contained. The surveillance team had found nothing new in 2 weeks. Marcus had run the route twice in the afternoon and cleared it. Daniel drove. Victoria sat in the back with her briefing materials and her reading glasses, and the particular focused stillness of someone preparing to close a deal. She asked him 2 questions on the way there, one about traffic, one about whether he'd eaten, which was the kind of question she'd started asking in the last week, in a way that suggested she hadn't decided yet whether it was okay that she was asking. He'd eaten. He told her so. She nodded and went back to her materials. The dinner went for 2 hours and 40 minutes. Daniel waited outside, walked the perimeter twice, checked in with Marcus at the 90-minute mark. Nothing moved. The neighborhood was quiet. The November air was cold enough to see your breath. At 9:47, Victoria came out. "Well?" he asked. "He's going to sign," she said. The small private satisfaction in her voice was different from the public version, less performed, more real. He wanted more equity protection in the term sheet, which is reasonable, and he wants a seat on the board, which I was expecting, and once we resolved both of those, he said yes. Congratulations. Don't congratulate me until the ink is dry. But she was almost smiling. Drive fast. I want to be home before 11. He drove. They took the mountain road route because the highway had construction delays that Marcus had flagged at the 9 o'clock check-in, a 40-minute backup at the bridge approach that would have pushed them well past midnight. The mountain road was 20 minutes faster when traffic was clean, and at 10 p.m. on a Friday traffic was clean. Daniel didn't love the mountain road. He'd noted it in his initial route assessment, 2 lanes guardrail on the cliffside, no lighting for a 3-mile stretch in the middle. Not ideal, but acceptable with the current threat level. He drove it at a controlled pace. Checked his mirrors every 8 seconds the way he always did, the rhythm of it so embedded in his body that he didn't notice doing it anymore. Victoria was on her phone. She was texting someone, her father probably. She did that after good meetings. They were 2 miles into the mountain section when Daniel felt it. Not heard it. Felt it. A soft, wrong resistance in the brake pedal when he touched it coming into the first curve. Like pressing something that should be solid and finding it had moved. His body understood before his mind fully processed it. He pressed again. The pedal went down further than it should have, far further, with none of the resistance a functioning brake system should produce. Hold on, he said. Victoria looked up from her phone. What? Hold on, now. He said it in the voice. The operational register. The frequency shift that Victoria had heard once before on a sidewalk in Midtown, and she grabbed the door handle and the center console simultaneously, without asking why, because she'd learned enough in 6 weeks to know that when he said it like that, you moved first and understood later. Daniel was already working through it. He downshifted hard, using the engine resistance to slow the vehicle, but the road was dropping in grade, and the curve ahead was coming at them, and the speed wasn't dropping fast enough. He pulled the emergency brake, a controlled angled pull, not a jerk, because a jerk would send them spinning, and felt the rear bite, felt the car shudder and yaw slightly. He steered into it. The curve came at them fast. He held the wheel and the grade and the yaw and the math of all of it simultaneously. The way you hold all the variables of a situation that has removed the option of error, and he brought them through the curve, with the rear of the car sliding 2 feet, maybe 3. The guardrail on Victoria's side close enough that he could hear the air change between the car door and the metal post. Then the curve was passed. The road straightened. The grade leveled. I used the emergency brake and the engine and the straightened road and brought the vehicle to a stop in the right lane. Silence. Complete silence. The kind that arrives after sound and motion have both stopped. That lasts about 3 seconds before the body understands it can breathe again. Victoria, he said, I'm here. Her voice was steady, completely steady, which he would think about later, that in the moment after the curve and the guardrail and the silence, she was steady. Are you hurt? No. She looked at him. Are you? No. He was already on his phone. He called Marcus before he'd finished checking his own hands for blood that wasn't there. I need you on the mountain road route mile marker 7. Now, bring your kit. What happened? Brake failure. We're stopped on the shoulder. Car is compromised. I need transport, and I need someone to look at the undercarriage before anyone else touches this vehicle. He hung up. Called 911. Gave the information in the flat, organized way of someone who has made emergency calls before and understands that clarity saves time. Then he got out of the car. He walked around the vehicle with his phone flashlight, looking at what had happened, looking for what had caused it. He didn't have to look long. Under the rear section, visible to anyone who knew what they were looking at, a brake line had failed. Not aged failure, not mechanical deterioration. The line had been cut. Partially cut enough to weaken it dramatically, not so completely that it would fail immediately on a flat road. It was designed to fail under pressure, under repeated braking, on an incline. Exactly the kind of incline they'd just come down. Daniel stood there in the cold for a moment and looked at what someone had done to the underside of this vehicle and felt something move through him that was not anger exactly. It was something colder and more focused than anger. He went back to the car. Victoria was still in the back seat, upright, phone in her hand. She'd been watching him through the window. He opened the door. "Tell me," she said. The brake line was cut. Her expression didn't collapse. It tightened, a drawing in, a compression the opposite of falling apart. "When?" she said. Marcus cleared the car at 4 p.m. The dinner was 3 hours. Whoever did this had access to the vehicle while it was parked at the residence. "Which means they knew where we'd be." "Yes." "Cross is under a federal investigation," she said. "He can't." "Cross isn't the only person with a stake in this," Daniel said. "Meridian Capital has resources and reach and a very strong motivation to stop you from testifying in any proceeding that locks up their trading records." Victoria went very still. "Raymond Voss," she said. "That's my guess. Yes. He has people." "It appears so." She looked at him. He could see her running at the calculation, the threat architecture, all the connections she was now reordering in her mind with this new piece in place. Then she looked at him differently. "You stopped the car," she said. "Yes." "On that curve." She paused. "I felt the guardrail." "I know. If we had hit it." "We didn't." "Daniel." She said his name the way she'd started saying it, not as a professional address, as something more personal. "That curve at that speed with no brakes." "I know," he said. "I was there." She looked at him for 3 full seconds. "Thank you," she said. And in 2 words, she meant about 40 things, and he could see all of them, and he nodded once, because some things don't need more than that. Marcus arrived in 9 minutes. NYPD arrived in 14. A second team that Daniel called in arrived in 22. The parking area at the private residence was reviewed. Security footage showed a man in a gray jacket spending 4 minutes near the vehicle at approximately 8:15 p.m., while Victoria and the founder were deep in the dinner meeting, and Daniel had been on his perimeter walk on the other side of the building. The 4-minute gap. That was all it took. Daniel looked at that footage for a long time. 4 minutes was enough. A partial cut on a brake line took someone who knew what they were doing less than 90 seconds. The rest of the time was cover, making it look like the man was simply walking by. The gray jacket was gone. The man's face was partially obscured. But the gait analysis run by the NYPD technical unit pulled a match from a database of known private security contractors with criminal backgrounds. The name came back 2 hours later. Trevor Cole, freelance security consultant. Previously employed by Meridian Capital Group as an operational liaison, a title that meant in practice whatever Meridian needed it to mean. Raymond Voss's print was on the knife, even if his hands were clean. The NYPD called the DOJ. The DOJ, which was already talking to Kevin Farr, suddenly had a great deal more to talk about. Daniel was with Victoria at the NYPD precinct until 2 in the morning, giving statements, reviewing footage, working through the chain with the detectives, who understood this was not a simple vandalism case, but the tail end of something that had federal implications several layers deep. Victoria gave her statement with the same precision she brought to everything: organized, factual, completely unembellished. The detective interviewing her said afterward to his partner that in 20 years he had never had a witness that composed. At 2:15, they were done. Daniel drove her home in Marcus's car. Marcus rode behind them in a second vehicle because the threat assessment was no longer theoretical, and Daniel wasn't cutting corners on transport. The city was quiet at that hour. The kind of quiet that makes you feel like you have the whole thing to yourself, which was an illusion, but a useful one. Victoria sat in the front seat this time. She hadn't said why, and he hadn't asked. For most of the drive, she didn't speak. Then, about 15 minutes from her building, she said, "I keep thinking about the guardrail." "Try not to," he said. "I can't help it. I felt it." She paused. "And I thought in that second, I thought about all the things I hadn't said to people." She looked at the city passing outside the window. "Isn't that strange? Everything moving that fast, and I was thinking about conversations I hadn't had." Daniel drove. "What conversations?" he asked. A long pause. "My father," she said. "I don't tell him enough. That I know what he did building the company, raising me after my mother died, all of it. I don't say it." She paused. And you. He kept his eyes on the road. What about me? He said. I've been building up to something, she said. Some version of an honest conversation about what I think of you and what happened and... She stopped. And on that curve I thought about the fact that I hadn't had it yet, and that felt wrong. Dangerously wrong. We're having it now, he said. Are we? Start. She looked at him. He could feel her looking at him even though he was watching the road. I was wrong about you, she said. Not just the first day, not just the champagne. I was wrong about the kind of man you are. I looked at your suit and your truck and your zip code, and I decided what you were worth, and I was so far from right that I'm embarrassed by the distance. She paused. You have more integrity in the way you show up every morning than most people I know have in their entire professional lives. You are the best person at your job I have ever observed, and more than any of that... She stopped again. More than that, he said, prompting her the way she'd prompted him, using her own technique back on her. More than any of that, she said, you are a genuinely good man. And I don't say that easily. I don't say it about almost anyone. A pause. I say it about my father, and I'm saying it about you. The city moved around them. Daniel drove. Victoria, he said. Don't thank me, she said. I'm not finished. She turned slightly in her seat. I know you have a life. I know you have Lily and your mother, and a house in Queens, and a truck with 200,000 miles on it that you probably know every rattle of. And I know that what I'm about to say could complicate all of that. But I almost hit a guardrail tonight, and the conversation I was thinking about was this one, so, he said. So I'm interested in you, she said. Plainly, directly. The way she did everything when she wasn't managing anything. Not as my bodyguard, not as an employee, as a person. I'm interested in who you are and how you think and what you do on Saturday mornings, and what Lily thinks is funny, and why you went back into that burning vehicle twice when once would have been more than enough. She took a breath. I'm interested in all of it. And I think you know that, and I think I've been making you wait for me to say it, and I'm saying it. He pulled up to her building. He put the car in park. He sat for a moment with his hands on the wheel. Then he looked at her. I went back in twice, he said, because there were still people inside. He paused. That's the same reason I'm still here. Victoria looked at him, for the first time since he'd known her. The first real undefended time. She looked at him without calculating, without assessing, without the management layer, or the performance layer, or any of the armor she'd built so carefully over so many years. She just looked at him. That's the most you've ever said in one stretch, she said. Don't get used to it, he said. She laughed. The real one, short, surprised, entirely unguarded. The same one from the late night in the office that had lingered in the room for days. She opened the car door. Then she stopped. Sunday, she said. What about it? I want to meet Lily. Daniel looked at her. She's going to like you, he said. She's going to immediately see through every wall you have. I know, Victoria said. I'm counting on it. She got out. Marcus walked her in. Daniel sat in the car and watched the lobby doors close and thought about a little girl on a back porch with dirt on her hands, and the way some things grow when you show up consistently, and the way some things only happen when you almost lose them first. His phone buzzed. A text from Thomas Sterling. It said only I heard. Thank God. Get some sleep. And Daniel, thank you. He put the phone in his pocket. He drove home through a city that looked exactly the same as it always did, loud and lit and enormous, but felt somehow like it had shifted by 1 degree. The imperceptible degree. The one you only notice when you stop and look back and realize the place you're standing is not the place you started. That 1 degree was everything. He knew that better than anyone. Sunday arrived, the way important days always do, without announcement, without ceremony, just the ordinary light of a morning that happened to contain something irreversible inside it. Daniel was up at 6. Not because he had to be, because 8 years of fatherhood had rebuilt his internal clock into something that didn't know how to sleep past 6, regardless of what the night before had contained, and the night before had contained a federal investigation update call that ran until 11:30, a debrief with Marcus that went until 12:15, and the particular sleeplessness that comes not from stress, but from anticipation, sitting quietly in your chest like a second heartbeat. Lily was already awake when he came downstairs. She was at the kitchen table in her pajamas with a bowl of cereal she'd made herself, and a library book open beside it, and she was talking to the plant on the windowsill, the one she'd named Daniel, in the low conversational murmur she used for things she considered important enough to address directly. He stood in the doorway and watched her for a moment. 8 years old, dark hair that she'd gotten from her mother and forgot to brush on weekends. A gap between her front teeth that the dentist said would close on its own in another year or two. A heart that had required 2 procedures and 1 terrifying hospitalization before her 3rd birthday, and which now, according to 3 different cardiologists, was strong and getting stronger. She was the best thing he had ever done. He thought that every morning. It never got less true. "The plant looks good," he said. Lily looked up. "I told him about the car thing," she said. "He was worried." Daniel poured himself coffee. "How do you know he was worried?" "His 3rd leaf was drooping yesterday. It's better now." She considered this with the seriousness of a scientist reviewing data. "I think he just needed to hear you were okay." Daniel sat down across from her. "Lily." "Dad." "Victoria is coming today." Lily looked at him with the particular attention she had focused, and still and already several steps ahead. It was the thing about her that reminded him most painfully of her mother. Sarah had had the same quality. The ability to make you feel that you were the only subject in the room. "I know," Lily said. "I told you yesterday." "I know that too." She turned a page in her library book without looking at it. "Is she nice?" Daniel thought about how to answer that honestly. "She's getting nicer," he said. Lily looked up. "That's a weird answer." "She's had a complicated year." "So have we." "Yes," he said. "We have." Lily picked up her spoon, considered her cereal, set it down. "Do you like her?" she asked. The directness of it. No performance, no indirection. Just the question, the way children ask questions, before they've learned to be afraid of the answers. "I do," he said. "Does she like you?" "I think so." Lily nodded, slowly processing this with the gravity it apparently deserved. "Does she know about my heart?" "She knows you've had some health challenges." "That's a grown-up way of saying it." "Yes," he agreed. "It is." "She can know the real version," Lily said, going back to her cereal. "I don't mind people knowing. It's just a thing about me. It's not the whole thing about me." Daniel looked at his daughter for a moment. "No," he said. "It's not." "What time is she coming?" 11. Lily glanced at the clock on the microwave. It was 6:14. "That's a long time from now." "We have things to do first." "Like what?" "Like you brushing your hair." Lily touched her hair with one hand, assessed the situation honestly, and returned to her cereal. "After breakfast," she said. "Deal," he said. He drank his coffee and watched his daughter read and thought about the mountain road and the guardrail and the 2 feet of air between the car door and the steel post, and how that gap, that 2 feet of cold November air, was the distance between this morning and a morning that didn't exist. I didn't think about it often. He'd learned over years of doing the kind of work that put you in proximity to bad outcomes, that the mind needed firm management when it came to near misses. You acknowledged them, you extracted the lessons, and then you set them down. You didn't carry them everywhere. The weight would break you. But this one he let sit for 1 more minute. Then he set it down. Victoria arrived at 11:03, which was 3 minutes later than she'd said, which he recognized as a significant concession from a woman who considered arriving on time a form of moral obligation. She was wearing jeans. He had genuinely never seen her in jeans and a dark green sweater, and her hair was down, and she was carrying a canvas bag that she held slightly away from her body, like she wasn't entirely sure what to do with it. He opened the door before she knocked. She looked at him. Then she looked at the house behind him, the small front porch, the slightly scuffed door. The wreath on the door that Lily had made at school and insisted on hanging in November, regardless of seasonal appropriateness. "I brought things," Victoria said. "I didn't know what to bring, so I brought several things, and now I'm concerned I overcommitted to the gesture." "What's in the bag?" "Books, because your daughter likes reading. And a small plant, because Sandra mentioned you have a plant situation. And cookies from the bakery near my building, because I cannot bake, and I wasn't going to pretend otherwise." She paused. "And I brought wine for you because adults need wine sometimes." Daniel stepped back to let her in. She crossed the threshold and stopped. The house was exactly what it was. Modest and lived in, and thoroughly occupied by the evidence of a child who was curious about everything, and a father who prioritized function over form. There were books on every flat surface. There was a drawing on the refrigerator. There were shoes by the door, and a backpack hanging from the staircase post, and a small collection of rocks on the windowsill beside the plants that Lily had been cataloging since September. Victoria stood in the middle of all of it and was very still. "It's warm," she said. Not the temperature. He understood that. "Yeah," he said. "It is." Lily appeared from the kitchen doorway. She had brushed her hair. Daniel noticed this and filed it as one of the small, significant things he would remember about this morning. She'd brushed her hair and put on the blue sweater she wore when she wanted to make a good impression, which she would never admit to, and she was looking at Victoria with the same focused, unhurried attention she'd given him at breakfast. Victoria looked at Lily. Something happened in her face that Daniel had only seen glimpses of before the thing under the armor, the part she protected most carefully. It was just a flicker, and it was gone in a second, but he saw it. "You must be Lily," Victoria said. "You must be Victoria," Lily said. A pause. "I brought you books," Victoria said. "I didn't know what you like, so I asked your dad, and he said you like plants and animals and things that explain how things work." "That's accurate," Lily said. She looked at the canvas bag. "What books?" Victoria set the bag on the floor and crouched down. She just folded herself right down to Lily's level without any ceremony about it, which Daniel noted, and pulled out 3 books. A field guide to North American plants, a children's book on how the heart works illustrated, and a novel about a girl who solves scientific mysteries. Lily took the heart book and looked at the cover. "This is about hearts," she said. "Your dad mentioned yours has been through some things," Victoria said. "I thought you might want to know even more about how it works. Because knowing how things work makes them less scary. At least that's always been true for me." Lily looked at her with that particular focused attention. "My heart isn't that scary anymore," she said. "It was when I was little. Now it's more like a thing I have to keep an eye on." She paused. "Like a plant." Victoria blinked. Then she looked up at Daniel. He shrugged slightly because there was nothing useful to add when Lily said something that landed like that. It was just who she was. "I like that," Victoria said, turning back to Lily. "That's a very good way to think about it." "Dad says the same thing about his job," Lily said. "That you have to keep an eye on it, or it gets away from you." She considered Victoria carefully. "He says that about you too. Not in a bad way." "Lily," Daniel said mildly. "What?" "It's true." Victoria looked up at Daniel with an expression that was trying very hard not to be amused and failing entirely. "What exactly does he say?" Victoria asked Lily. "That you're working on things," Lily said, "and that it takes time." She tilted her head slightly. "He's patient. He was patient with my heart too." The room was quiet for a moment. Victoria looked at Lily with an expression Daniel recognized now, the one that came right before something honest. The one that meant the armor was down at least part way. "I owe your father an apology that I've been giving him in pieces," Victoria said. "And I think you should know that because he deserves people around him who acknowledge when they've been wrong." Lily looked at her with great seriousness. "Did you say sorry?" "Several times." "Did you mean it? Every time? More each time?" Lily considered this. Then she nodded once the way her father nodded, that single decisive motion that meant the matter was processed and resolved. "Okay," she said. "Do you want to see my plants?" "I would love to," Victoria said. They went to see the plants. Daniel stood in his kitchen and listened to his daughter explain the naming system to Victoria. There was Daniel and there was Sprout. And the cactus was named Gerald because he had an attitude and heard Victoria ask questions that were genuine, not the performed interest of an adult managing a child, but real questions, the kind that came from someone who was actually listening. He made lunch. He stood at the counter and made sandwiches and listened to the two of them in Lily's room and felt something in his chest that didn't have a clean name, something large and quiet and tentative, the way things feel when they're real enough to be fragile. Lunch happened around the kitchen table. Lily talked about school. She was working on a science project about local ecosystems, which had led to an extensive independent research project on urban birds that her teacher had not assigned, but that Lily had undertaken anyway because she found the original assignment insufficient. Victoria asked questions about the birds. Lily answered them at length. Daniel ate his sandwich and watched the two of them across the table and thought about how the most important things in his life had a way of finding each other without his help. Like they were always going to. Like the only thing required of him was to be consistent enough in the right direction that when they arrived at the same place, he was already there, after lunch. Lily went to water her plants, a precise and ritualized process that required privacy, apparently, and Daniel and Victoria sat at the kitchen table with coffee. "She's extraordinary," Victoria said. "I know. She asked me 3 questions in 10 minutes that I didn't have good answers to." "What questions?" "She asked me what I was afraid of. She asked me what I thought the most important thing in the world was. And she asked me whether I was going to keep coming back." Victoria wrapped both hands around her mug. "I said uncertainty, people, and yes, in that order." "What did she say?" "She said those were good answers, and that Gerald the cactus had once made her afraid of plants, and she got over it by learning everything about cacti." Victoria paused. "I'm not entirely sure what she meant, but I think she was being encouraging." "She was," Daniel said. "That's how she encourages people, through analogy." Victoria looked at him. "She's going to be remarkable." "She already is." "I mean when she's grown. The way she thinks." "I know." He paused. "Her mother thought the same way. It comes through." Victoria was quiet. She turned her mug on the table. "Tell me about Sarah," she said. He looked at her. "Not," she stopped. "Not because I need to know. Because you've been a complete person in your own history long before I showed up, and the things that made you who you are deserve to exist in the room." She held his gaze. "I want to know." He was quiet for a moment. "She was a pediatric nurse," he said. "She grew up in Georgia. She had a laugh that you could hear from 2 rooms over, and she was embarrassed by it, which only made it funnier. She was the kind of person who remembered everyone's birthday and brought soup when people were sick and called her grandmother every Sunday without fail." He paused. "She was better than me at most things. She was especially better at letting people in." "She sounds wonderful." "She was," he said, simply. No past tense grief in it, because he'd processed the grief into something that could live alongside the love rather than replacing it. "She would have liked you eventually." Victoria looked up. "Eventually?" "She had good instincts about people. She would have seen through the armor faster than I did and liked what was underneath. But she would have made you earn it." He paused. "She was patient that way, but not infinitely patient." Victoria looked at him for a long moment. "I would have worked for it," she said. "I know you would have." From upstairs they heard Lily's voice not calling for them, just talking presumably to the plants. The low narrative murmur of a child who believed in the importance of consistent communication with growing things. Both of them heard it at the same time, and both of them almost smiled at the same time, and then both of them were smiling, and neither of them said anything about it. That was the moment Daniel thought later. Not the mountain road, not the late nights in the office, not the champagne at the reception, or the conversation in the parking lot after the dinner meeting. This was the moment. The Sunday kitchen, the coffee going cold, the sound of his daughter upstairs talking to a plant named after him. This was the moment it became something he was certain of. The phone call that changed everything. Again came on a Wednesday morning, 6 days later, at 7:48 a.m. Daniel was in his car in the Sterling Industries parking garage, 40 seconds from walking into the building, when his phone rang. A number he didn't recognize. He answered anyway because not recognizing a number was a reason to answer, not a reason to ignore. "Mr. Carter." A man's voice. Measured, institutional, the voice of someone who spent a lot of time delivering information that carried weight. Speaking. "My name is Richard Haas. I'm a senior attorney with the Department of Justice Criminal Division. I'm calling because your name appears as a cooperating witness in the federal investigation currently involving Sterling Industries, Adrian Cross, and Meridian Capital Group." A pause. "We have a development I need to make you aware of before it becomes public." Daniel got out of the car. He stood in the parking garage and pressed the phone to his ear. "I'm listening," he said. "Kevin Farr completed his cooperation agreement yesterday. The testimony he provided covers not only the scope of Adrian Cross's activity within Sterling Industries, but a broader network of corporate intelligence operations that Meridian Capital has been running for approximately 3 years. Another pause. "What I'm about to tell you has not yet been disclosed to Ms. Sterling. We're calling you first because of your role in securing the initial evidence chain and because we want to coordinate the timing of disclosure to her." "Tell me," Daniel said. "Raymond Voss was arrested this morning at 5:15 a.m. at JFK International Airport. He was attempting to board a private flight to Luxembourg." A pause. "He has been charged with securities fraud conspiracy to commit securities fraud and 1 count of conspiracy to commit assault in the first degree. The assault charge relates to the brake line incident on the mountain road." Daniel stood very still. "The man in the gray jacket," he said. "Trevor Cole entered a guilty plea this morning as part of a cooperation agreement. He has confirmed that the instruction to tamper with Ms. Sterling's vehicle came directly from Raymond Voss." The attorney paused. "Mr. Carter, Raymond Voss authorized an attempt on Ms. Sterling's life to prevent her testimony in the securities investigation. What happened on that mountain road was not a warning. It was intended to be fatal." The parking garage was very quiet. Daniel stood there with his phone and the silence and the knowledge that the 2 feet of air between the car door and the guardrail had been someone's calculation, someone's deliberate plan, and that the gap between that night and this morning was him and nothing else. "Is she safe now?" he asked. "With Voss in custody and Cole cooperating, the immediate threat is considered neutralized. We will need Ms. Sterling's testimony in the coming months, but the operational threat is gone." A pause. "You should know, Mr. Carter, that the evidence package you assembled, the access logs, the surveillance documentation, the timeline, it was foundational to this case. The attorneys on this matter asked me to convey that specifically." Daniel said, "Tell them they're welcome." He hung up. He stood there for another 30 seconds. Then he called Victoria. She picked up on the second ring. "I'm in the elevator," she said. 5 floors out." "Meet me in the lobby," he said. "Not your office, the lobby." A pause. She heard something in his voice she'd gotten good at that better than most people had ever gotten with him. "Okay," she said. She was stepping off the elevator when he came through the main entrance. She saw his face and stopped moving. "Tell me," she said. He told her. He told her about Haas and Voss and Trevor Cole and the guilty plea and the arrest at JFK at 5:15 in the morning, and what the intended outcome of the mountain road had actually been. He watched her face move through the information in real time. The first recognition, the meaning, the specific terrible meaning of intended to be fatal, and then something on the other side of that, something that wasn't fear, because she'd already processed the fear on the mountain road itself. Something more complicated, the understanding of the full picture. The lobby was quiet around them. Early morning sparse, just the cleaning staff finishing up and the security desk and the revolving door, letting in small gusts of cold air every time someone passed through. Victoria stood very still. "He wanted me dead," she said. Not a question. Just the sentence turned over looked at. "Yes." "Because of the testimony?" "Yes." "And you?" She stopped, started again. "On the mountain road when you stopped the car." She looked at him. "You saved my life." We got lucky with the grade leveling, he said. The road? Daniel. Her voice was firm. You saved my life. He looked at her. Yes, he said. I did. She took one breath, then another. He could see her organizing herself, not suppressing organizing the way she did everything. Taking the information and deciding what shape she was going to carry it in. My father, she said. I'll call him after you. I wanted you to hear it from me first. She looked at him for a long moment. The lobby moved around them, and neither of them moved with it. What would have happened, she said carefully, if you hadn't been there on the mountain road, if it had been anyone else driving? He didn't answer that. Daniel. It wasn't anyone else, he said. But if it had been. He held her gaze. Then we wouldn't be having this conversation, he said. She heard the full meaning of that. He could see her hear it the way it landed and settled into a permanent place in her understanding of what these months had been. I need to call my father, she said. I know. She didn't move yet. She stood there in the lobby of her own building, the building she had built from a one-bedroom office in Brooklyn, with a man who had turned out to be a blueprint for her destruction, and she looked at the man who had stood outside her door every morning at 5:45 for 2 months, and who had held a car on a mountain curve at 60 miles an hour with no brakes, and brought it to a stop on the right shoulder. Thank you, she said. And this time, it wasn't 2 words carrying 40 meanings. It was 2 words that had been stripped down to their essential weight, and that weight was enormous, and she said them like she knew it. It's the job, he said. Stop saying that, she said. Not sharp. Something softer. He looked at her. Thank you, he said back, for everything since. She understood what he meant. She called her father. Thomas Sterling picked up on the first ring, which meant he'd been waiting for news, which meant he was a man who understood that the morning after a federal arrest was a morning that required availability, Victoria told him. Daniel stood nearby and watched her face while she talked to her father, the way it moved, the way something released in her as she heard his voice, the degree of looseness that appeared when the person on the other end was the person she loved without complication and without performance. When she hung up, her eyes were bright. Not crying. Adjacent to it. The effort it cost not to. He wants to see us both for dinner Friday, she said. Both of us, Daniel repeated. He said, and I'm quoting directly, bring the man who keeps saving my daughter's life before I have to come find him myself. She paused. He's been waiting to say that for 2 months. You could hear the satisfaction. Your father is a smart man, Daniel said for what felt like the 100th time. You keep saying that. It keeps being true. And then, in the lobby in the morning, with the revolving door, and the cleaning staff, and the cold air coming in from outside. Victoria Sterling laughed. The real one. The one that was short and surprised, and had nothing performed in it. The one he'd first heard in the office over a late-night coffee, and had been listening for ever since. It lasted longer this time. The next 3 months moved, the way things move when the crisis has passed, and the real work of building something begins steadily, sometimes slowly, full of small moments that don't announce themselves as important and turn out to be the most important ones. The federal cases proceeded. Voss was denied bail at his initial hearing. Cross entered negotiations with the DOJ that his attorneys described publicly as ongoing and productive, which everyone understood to mean he was cooperating extensively to reduce his own exposure. Farr's cooperation agreement held. The Meridian Capital trading operation unraveled the way financial schemes unravel when the people running them start talking to federal prosecutors fast, completely, and with an extraordinary amount of detail. Victoria testified twice. Once in a deposition that lasted 6 hours. Once in a closed-door session with the SEC that lasted most of a day. Both times Daniel sat outside the room and waited, and both times she came out looking exactly the way she'd gone, in composed, precise, fully herself. And both times in the car on the way back, she exhaled a breath that was longer than usual and let herself sit quietly for exactly 5 minutes before picking her phone back up and returning to work. He timed it once, exactly 5 minutes, every time. Sterling Industries announced 2 major acquisitions in January. the AI infrastructure company, whose founder Victoria had been courting, signed, closed, integrated with remarkable smoothness. Given the circumstances of the night, the deal was verbally struck. And a second company, a data security firm, that everyone in the industry considered the smartest move Victoria Sterling had made in 3 years, which was saying something given the competition. The board, which had rallied around her in the immediate aftermath of the cross-exposure, had now settled into something more durable. A genuine alignment built not on crisis management, but on demonstrated competence and the kind of trust that comes from watching someone perform under pressure and not break. Thomas Sterling reduced his formal involvement in board oversight to 3 meetings a year. He made this announcement publicly, which everyone understood to be a deliberate statement. His daughter did not need supervision. She never had. The office that had been Adrian Cross's remained empty until February, when Victoria had it converted into an expansion of the engineering team's collaboration space. The conversion took a week. Nobody remarked on what had been there before. She didn't mark it or memorialize it. She simply replaced it with something functional, which was, Daniel thought, exactly the right thing to do, with a space that had been occupied by something that turned out to be hollow. Daniel's contract had been formally restructured in November. The new title was Director of Corporate Security, a role that covered the full scope of what he'd actually been doing since the first week. Not just physical protection, but intelligence analysis, threat assessment, internal security protocol, and what Thomas Sterling in the contract review meeting called the kind of judgment that you either have or you don't. The salary was different. The medical coverage was different. The terms were different. He hadn't moved. Still the house in Queens. Still the truck which he'd had serviced, and which the mechanic said had another 100,000 miles in it, if he was careful, which he intended to be. Still, his mother 3 blocks away. Still the Sunday routine. Still the school pickup on Tuesdays and Thursdays when his schedule allowed. Some things changed when your life expanded. Some things you held still deliberately because they were the structure that everything else was built on. Lily held still. Lily, who had taken to calling Victoria by her first name from the 3rd visit onward, which Victoria had clearly expected to take longer and was visibly moved by. Lily, who had informed Victoria in February that Gerald the cactus had developed a new arm and that she considered this a good sign for the year. Lily, who had asked Victoria in March whether she was going to marry her dad, and who had received the answer, "We're figuring it out," with the pragmatic acceptance of a child who understood that grown-ups moved slowly, but eventually got where they were going. Daniel hadn't been in the room for that conversation. Victoria told him about it that evening. She asked directly, Victoria said. "That's Lily," he said. "I didn't know what to say." "What did you say?" "That we were figuring it out." A pause. "Are we?" he asked. Victoria looked at him across the kitchen table in his house. She was there more often now enough that Lily had given her a mug that was specifically hers. A blue one with a plant on it that Lily had picked out with the seriousness of someone making a permanent decision. "I think we've mostly figured it out," Victoria said. "I think we're in the part where we're deciding how to say it." Daniel looked at her. "I love you," he said. It landed in the room like something that had been waiting to be said for a long time and was simply glad to have finally arrived. Victoria looked at him. Something moved through her face. Not surprise, because they had been moving towards this for months, and she was not a woman who was surprised by things she'd already understood, but something more complete. A fullness. The expression of someone who has been given something they had begun to believe they didn't know how to receive. "I know," she said. "That's not the response." "I know that too." She held his gaze. "I love you. I've been practicing saying it because I don't have a good history with saying it easily, and I wanted to say it right." A pause. "I love you. And I love Lily. And I love that you have a house that feels like someone actually lives in it, and a truck that sounds like it's thinking about retiring, and a daughter who named a plant after you." She stopped. "I love all of it. The whole thing. You." He reached across the table and took her hand. She let him. She held on. Upstairs, Lily was talking to her plants. Outside, the city was doing what the city always did, loud and enormous and indifferent and full of a million private moments like this one that nobody recorded and everyone carried. The dinner with Thomas Sterling on that first Friday had become a regular thing, not weekly, but consistent, the way consistent things are when they matter enough to protect. Thomas, who was sharper and funnier than his formal professional reputation suggested, had taken to asking Daniel operational questions about the company's security posture with the enthusiasm of a man who had found a subject he could discuss with genuine depth. He had also in March placed his hand on Daniel's shoulder after a dinner and said, "You are exactly what I hoped you were." And then he'd gone back to arguing with Victoria about a board decision, and Daniel had stood there with the weight of that hand still on his shoulder, and understood that some things didn't need more than a sentence. On a Tuesday morning in April, 6 months after the mountain road, Daniel walked into Victoria's office at 7:40 with a coffee that Sandra had stopped being surprised to see him bring and set it on the desk in front of her. Victoria was reading something. She looked up. "What?" she said. "Nothing. Coffee." She looked at him with the particular expression she'd developed for moments when he was doing something she found worth paying attention to. "You look like you're thinking something." "I'm always thinking something." You look like you're thinking something you might actually say." He sat down across from her. "I want to talk about something." She set her reading down, full attention the way she gave it when something mattered. "Lily's birthday is in June," he said. "I know, the 14th. She reminded me twice. She wants a party. Real one, not the small family thing we usually do." He paused. "She specifically asked if you would come." "Of course I'll come." "She also asked if you would help plan it." Victoria blinked. "She wants me to help plan her birthday party." She said, and I quote, "Victoria is organized and she knows people, and she would probably make it really good." He paused. "She's not wrong." Victoria looked at him with an expression that was trying very hard to hold its shape, and not quite succeeding. "A birthday party," she said. "An 8-turning-9 birthday party. She wants plants involved. She's very specific about the plants." "Of course she does." Victoria looked at her desk, then back at him. "Daniel." "Yeah." "She's asking me to be part of something." "Yes." "A regular part, not a visiting part." "That's what she's asking." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "I want that," she said, quietly, plainly, without management. "I want to be a regular part." "I know," he said. She stopped. "I've never had a family that I built myself. That wasn't inherited or obligated. That I actually—" She stopped again. "Chose," he said. "Yes." "I know," he said again. "I want the same thing." She looked at him. Then she picked up her coffee, took a sip, set it back down, and opened her laptop. "Tell her yes," she said. "Tell her I have opinions about plant-themed birthday parties, and she needs to be prepared for them." He stood up. "She'll be thrilled," he said. "I know." A pause, and then without looking up from her screen, "Tell her I want the plant named after me to be prominently featured." Daniel stopped at the door. "She'll make that happen." Good. Still not looking up. But the small private smile was there, the one she didn't perform for anyone, the one he'd come to recognize as the most honest thing her face did. "Go do your job, Mr. Carter." "Yes, ma'am," he said. He walked out. He stood in the corridor for exactly 1 second. Then he went to work. This was the thing he had known since he was a young man, standing in burning places and pulling people out of them. That the point was never the fire. The point was what you built after. The point was what you chose to protect when the smoke cleared and you could see what was actually there. He had protected Victoria Sterling. He had also, without planning, to build something with her. Something that had started in contempt and fear, and the specific cruelty that frightened people use when they don't know they're frightened, and had moved through honesty and late nights and a mountain road and a little girl named Lily who talked to plants into something real. Something that required maintenance and attention and consistency. Something that rewarded all three. Some people came into your life through the front door, announced and expected. Some came through the side entrance in worn suits and old trucks on a Tuesday morning when everything was wrong and they were the only thing standing in the right place. Victoria Sterling had learned that the hard way. Daniel Carter had known it all along. And Lily, who had known it longer than either of them, put a new plant on her windowsill that spring and named it Victoria, and told it every day that it was going to grow up strong. She was right. She usually